Hi friends. So today I want to talk a little bit about putting out into the deep. I don't know about you, but it seems as if our culture has become pretty shallow. And even we as Christians can be tempted just to live in the shallows. People are not thinking deeply and they're not living deeply. And along those lines, many of us are not living deeply in our relationship with God. You know, we're reacting more than reflecting. We are reacting more than responding. And we're really not taking a lot of time to breathe in deep all the changes that are happening in our lives right now. Rather, we're just kind of jumping, it's fight or flight type of thing, right? That's living in the shallows. That's not living in the deep. And the Gospels are always, and Jesus is always calling us to live in the deep. And I think built into the deeps of our hearts is that yearning, that longing, that desiring for the deeps of God, the fullness of God, and the fullness of life, and living life fully, living out life way out deep in the lake, rather than just, being afraid to put our toes in the water. Okay, so that's kind of setting the stage here, right? It's setting the stage for Jesus' response. And Jesus' response comes to us in the form of Luke chapter 5. And it's that beautiful calling of Peter to become one of his disciples. Because in calling Peter as his disciple, yes, he's calling Peter, but he's also calling all of us. He's showing us how he's calling us. And the process that we all have to go through, just like Peter went through in order to live a deep life, a fulfilling life, a more complete life, a healed life, a more whole life, and a life that's more abundant. And not just for us and for our loved ones, but for a society that has become so shallow in its living. And it hurts all of our hearts when we see it. And it causes us fear. So what does this look like? Okay. So Peter is fishing. Just like you and I, we're living our lives in our routines from day to day. And fishing in Jesus' day was very much a routine. And in the midst of all that, boredom can set in. Complacency can set in. Just like in our lives, as we live the humdrums of our life, as we live the rhythms of our lives, we can become very bored. We can become bored with our prayer. We can become bored at Mass. We can become bored with our work. We can become bored with our spouses, right? Okay. So what to do with that? Because in that boredom, we can become complacent. We can become persons who are apathetic to life and are just trying to get through day to day. We can become sad. We can become depressed. There's a lot of reactions to living the routine. Enter in Jesus to Peter's life. Now, the occasion was that Jesus was drawing big crowds. People were attracted to his words. And so much so that in this particular day, he's all the way up to the water's edge and everyone's surrounding him and he can't really get a distance and project his voice. So he sees Peter there and he's been out all night fishing and he's cleaning his nets. He said, hey, put out a little bit from the shore so I can teach the people. And Peter's like, whatever, I'm done with the day. Okay. And he doesn't know who Jesus is yet. Maybe he knows a little bit about him from his brother Andrew. So he puts out, and Jesus starts to talk. And all that Peter can do in the boat alone is sit there and listen. So something in what Jesus was saying that day stirs something inside of Peter. So that's the first thing, right? Is we have to allow in our situation in life, in the shallows of our life, right where we're at in the shallows, in the routines of our life, we have to allow something new. We have to allow God to come into it. Even again, if it's just in the shallows, to come in and to start speaking to our human situation and trusting that He has the words to speak to every situation in our life. Our broken marriage, our kids that we never thought were going to go astray. But listen, that's what can happen in marriages, and that's what can happen in our families, is that they can become so routine, right? That we take them for granted and we take advantage of them. And we would never think that our spouse would up and leave us or fall out in love with us. Or we would never think that our kids would do something immoral or drink or do drugs or other things that we would come and have to bail them out and say, how did this come to us? Right? Simply because we were going for the emotions and they were going for the motions. Now, we have to allow God to break in. And that's what happened with Peter. Even unexpectedly allow Him to break in. And when He says, listen, I have some words to say here, let Him do that. And He can do that, and He will do that. And like Peter, it will stir something inside of us. Okay. So then after this, Jesus turns to Peter and He says, let's put out into the deep now. And let's go catch some fish. Now at this point, Peter, who's the fisherman, Jesus, who's not the fisherman, he's like, all that he knows, he's some itinerant rabbi, preacher. What does he know about fishing, right? And we can do the same thing. Even though we know God is God, we by the way we live our lives, what can God do for me, right? No, we want to direct Him, not Him direct us. And Peter could have done that. He could have said, and he basically does, he says, listen, we've been fishing all night long and we haven't caught anything. As you know, in Jesus' day, fishing was done at night, not during the day. And now this is during the day. So Peter could have been right and would have been right by saying, so I'm not going to put out in the daytime and go fishing. You're out of your mind. You don't know what you're saying. Come back tonight and join me. I'm going to go home and go to bed. And then we'll try to catch some fish. But Peter doesn't do that. Even though he doesn't understand, he allows Jesus not only to speak to his life, but now to direct his life. And we are very uncomfortable with that, right? We want to tell God how to do it, when to do it, with whom to do it, why to do it, what to do, and so on and so forth. And then when he doesn't jump high, like we tell him to jump high, then what do? We give up on him. We could have been, Peter could have been, said, listen, I'm out of here. The boat's yours. I'm going back home and getting some sleep. But he doesn't. And Jesus, in his encounter with Peter, and then inspiring Luke later to write this, is saying, pay attention. This is how to deal with all this. The shallows. Letting me in. And now letting me direct you to bring you to the deeps. To bring you to a place where you're not comfortable. Where you're not in control. Where I'm going to ask you to do something that you would rather not do. And that you don't think you need. And you don't think is going to produce. And that's the situation that Jesus invites Peter into. And Peter says yes. And that's supposed to be us. You know, I mean, just think about, let's just stay right here to St. Francis. Just think about how we're used to, over many years, and sometimes even in our families, over many generations of doing church the way that we are used to doing church. And now, God is calling us to put out into the deeps. Meaning, to put out and let me direct your life. Let me lead you to something that you're not comfortable and you don't think is going to produce the results. And look what's been happening as God has been calling our entire church, every single one of you. And this is going on in other churches, so if you're listening and you're in other places, this is happening all around us. God is calling us to Alpha and to walking with purpose, and that man is you, and to missionaries to the family, and to youth group for middle school and for high school and for young adult ministry, and a variety of other encounters, to Eucharistic adoration and to worship and praise. And he's calling us to all of these ways to go deep. And it is uncomfortable to us because we think we know the way and we think we know what's best. And it's based upon how we have always fished for God. And Jesus is just obliterating all that. And he's saying, trust me. Let me take you out for fishing. So he does, and Peter does, and something unexpected happens. Which always happens when we're willing to trust God and to trust change and to allow him to stretch us and to expand us. Peter catches the mother load. And so much so that he has to call upon his partners. And it not only fills up his boat, his life, but it fills up the life of his partners. And this is supposed to be Jesus telling us, this is supposed to be you and I. If we allow him to lead us out into the deep, then something unexpected is going to happen. Beyond what we think is possible and beyond what we think is necessary for us. And yet in Peter's life, it provides for his livelihood. He catches more fish than he ever could have caught. And scholars tell us that he earns in that fishing months and months worth of wages in order to be able to provide for his family, where before, when he was doing on his own in the middle of the night, when he should have been doing it, and he was doing it, he caught nothing. And that's what God is saying. You're not going to catch anything without me, including me, and including the life that I want to give you. You know? And this is what's going to happen to our lives if we put out into the deep, is that unexpected things will happen. Get ready for it. And the calling to it will be uncomfortable, and it will stretch you. But you will catch the mother load, and more than ever that you would have imagined or hoped for or thought that you even needed, if you just let him direct rather than you direct. And what happens at the end of this particular passage? Peter says what we say. Lord, I'm not worthy. Depart from me, because I'm a sinful man. And this is a caution, this is a heads up, that when we have an authentic encounter with Jesus Christ, we will feel as if we're unworthy and we won't want to go further. And we'll make up some excuse, some reason not to continue on with him. Because what will happen to us will frighten us. What we start to see around us and start to experience inside of us and where it might lead us could be terrifying for us. Because God is mysterious, and God is awesome, and God is all powerful. And what he has to offer us is more than we ever could have imagined in the routine of our lives, in the routine of our religion, and the routine of our relationship with him. In the routines of our marriages, in the routines of our families, in the routines of our job, in the routines of the society that we live in. God is going to call us beyond all And what does Jesus say? What does he say? He says this is beautiful. He says, do not be afraid. And Jesus left everything. And Peter left everything and followed Jesus. Do not be afraid. From now on, you'll be catching men. Do not be afraid, Jesus says to you. From now on, you'll be catching your spouses and your children and your parents and your friends and your classmates and people on your sports team with you and your boyfriends and your girlfriends. Do not be afraid. I'm going to call you to a new life. Come follow me. And Peter followed him. And it not only changed his life, it changed Andrew's life and those who were in partner with him, James and John. And it ended up changing the world. We are not going to change. And we're not going to change the people that we love the most. And we're certainly not going to change this world of ours if we stay in our routines. And we don't start listening to God, even in the shallows of our life. And we're not going to change other people and change them for their better and the abundance of God and what God wants to offer our lives unless we allow him to put out into the deep and stop objecting and saying, I know best for my life and I'm going to direct you, God, rather than you direct me. And we're not going to change other people's lives for the better unless we allow the unexpected to happen. And be comfortable with the uncomfortable. And allow God to stretch us. Even here at St. Francis, with all the new things that he's calling, all the deep things that he's calling to us to do, or in your parish or where you're at. And then when we allow all this stuff, we're not going to change unless we continue on with him, even though we're afraid. We're afraid of him. And we have right to be afraid of him because he is going to call us to something awesome and something that is not routine and something that is going to change the world. Put out into the deep. It's time for you and me and our parish and everybody we love and the town we live in and the world that we're praying for and a world that desperately needs Christians to stop living according to the routines and start living according to God and allow him to put us out into the deep. Until next time, friends.